What is up, everybody? It is Alex from Heavy New York calling from the Alto again, and this time we are here with one of New York City's own. We are here with Letallis. Thank you, Jake, for coming on the show today. Long time coming.
Yeah, man. Dude, it's been a long time coming. Yeah.
Yeah.
So happy to do that.
Yeah, I mean, you've been there since day one of Heavy New York, since I started off as a SoundCloud journalist, I guess you could call it in that regard. So it's great to finally make an interview happen for the YouTube channel and all that.
Yeah.
But
Hell yeah, man.
this new EP, 1001 Nights, this is chapter one. So first thing is always first. Are you planning to make this into an everlasting series? Is this going to be a trilogy or a whole franchise, if you will? Is this the beginning of a long epic journey that lies ahead?
Yeah, I mean, that was kind of the idea behind it. Kind of funny to think of it like as a franchise, but there will be accessories available at your local bodega. But yeah, I mean, the intention behind this was initially thinking of splitting it up into three chapters. So chapter one came out this year in 2024. Chapter two will be the next one, obviously. And then, so three in total. So it'll be a saga. Yeah.
Was this always
trilogy? Sorry.
Was this always the intention? Was this always the idea? Is something that you've always wanted to do, or was this a spur of the moment idea as you were sort of like writing more and more, and it just made more sense to do it that way?
I think it definitely evolved into something as I was writing it. But I think one of the main ideas behind it was essentially that instead of it came out of my want to release like another full length record. So I was like, okay, instead of me just doing just an EP, I figured I have more material that I want to write for more than just one EP. So then I was like, okay, well, what if I did something where it's shorter releases that happen more frequently, just to kind of keep up with public attention spans being just abysmal these days, And the other thing is the last record I did, Resonate. It was a lot of fun and everything, but it's putting out that big initial release and then it just kind of loses momentum really quickly. So I figured, by doing a trilogy or something like that, it's kind of continued releases that, kind of stay in the public eye a little bit easier.
Yeah, and being that it is, has a lot of prog elements into your sound as well. I mean, it'll still be the length of a full-length album anyway, EP or otherwise, right?
Yeah, and then that also kind of has the intention of eventually that could be a full-length record, So with the idea of it being one coherent piece, in the end, yeah.
That's awesome. It almost seems like you are releasing the album. You are just releasing it in chunks. And this record definitely left me wanting more, meaning in a good way. I thought everything
cool.
from when you opened up with Merchant and you end with, the Visor and the Sage. I want more. I want more. I want more. So we're not going to have to wait 10 years for new Letallis this time, right?
No. And sorry about that. Life kind of happens in between. So just dealing with all of that. So, but definitely going to release it soon.
Would you consider 1001 Nights? Obviously that you have this trilogy in mind, but let's say maybe somebody is just getting on board with Letallis for chapter 2 or even chapter 3. Is this meant to be listened to chronologically? Do you have to listen to part 1 in order to get part 2 and part 3?
Mm-hmm. No, I mean, I don't think so. I think it ultimately helps to tell the story a little bit, if you want the full bigger picture. There was a lot of setup that I did in chapter 1 in terms of because in the story of the 1001 Nights, or the Arabian Nights as it's also known as, there's a lot of what they call frame stories or stories within stories. So in chapter 1, I did some of that setting up. It's it starts off with Merchant, where you're not even in the story itself yet. You're just kind of from the point of view of somebody who comes across this merchant, and they're kind of luring you into this idea of the stories. So it's kind of the initial thing. Then you get into the first frame story, which is 1001 Nights. That's the story in which every other story is based off of. And then after that, so the songs like Thief and the Vizier and the Sage, those are more so the actual start of the regular stories. So in chapter 2 and 3, as far as I know right now, technically I have not even written them yet, so it's all to be determined, but those are going to be more so just a continuation of just stories from the actual frame story 1001 Nights. So technically you wouldn't really have to like listen to it chronologically. Yeah.
Is there any bit of your like personal life or your personal experiences vested into this EP or this whole trilogy, or is this a concept completely external from yourself and you're not really bringing too much? I mean, in the end, every painting is a self-portrait, but like, is there any personal experiences serving as a subject matter or the fuel to the fire of this?
Not necessarily so many things personal, but I mean, I like to think that there are certain things that I weave into the stories as personal. I mean, like you said, it's all kind of like a reflection of my opinions on things anyway. So I mean, because typically when they talk about the story of like just the 1001 Nights, it's typically taught or kind of talked about in this very kind of like fantasy epic kind of way of like, ooh, this like wonderful landscape and where all these like magical tales are told. And it's like, my take on that, and this is not necessarily an original take, but it's like the stories themselves are actually pretty dark, which is why it lends itself to me to be like a really good like kindling for like a metal record, because I was like, oh man, this shit's really dark. It's like this woman is like kind of held hostage by this like tyrannical murderous king, and then so just kind of taking from different perspectives there. So it's not necessarily that's any personal experience weaved into it, but more so personal opinions, I guess, maybe weaved into it. Yeah.
How would you say, because this year does mark 10 years since Resonate, your last album. Now, just to put things into perspective, that came out 2 years before I started getting involved in the scene. So,
oh, nice, yeah.
Yeah, so now, Distant in Hand, I requested at every Letallis show, because to me, like, the way, like, End of Heartache is always reminiscent of Roadrunner Records, in a way, not to compare myself to them at all, but, you have, like, your albums or your songs, End of Heartache by Killswitch Engage, or, any Wait and Bleed by Slipknot, like all those signature Roadrunner songs. To me, Distant in Hand is like the signature going back to the scene songs, like along with maybe Perish by Solemn Vision or Pretty Ugly by Fear is Dead. You get the idea. So
nice, yeah, hell yeah.
What was your creative mindset 10 years ago? Because I do consider Resonate to be just as good as 1001 Nights. It's still fantastic EP. There are its differences, but the songwriting and craftsmanship is a force to be reckoned with 10 years ago. So what was your creative mindset back then? Has it changed that much in these last 10 years?
Yeah, I mean, I would say that was definitely something where I think I was more just trying to get out, like just, I didn't have as much of a coherent like tapestry that I had for 1001 Nights. It was more so just kind of like these individual songs that I just, just had some more kind of like personal concepts behind the idea. I mean, the ultimate idea was like things that like resonate with people, right? A little, on the nose, but yeah, I mean, I think it was really just kind of like that record. I think I wanted each song to have its own different style to it and definitely sound like it was, part of the same coherent piece, but also at the same time, like each one to be like distinguishable. So I definitely, I mean, my sense of like, I'm like a melodic person. I rarely write riffs that are like very like just, kind of like just heavy for the sake of being heavy. I always find that I kind of have to have some type of melody in there to kind of like keep me interested. So I think that's kind of been the same approach. I would say maybe something that's changed is that, let's see, I don't know. I mean, kind of more so like what fits the song, even though I wrote some long songs on this EP, I think some of the goal for the next stuff is just to really kind of be a little bit more to the point, kind of like get in and out and like get your message across without it being over 4 or 5 minutes, because again, I ended up writing like in another 8-minute song, which is fun. I love doing that, but I don't know if everyone's always on the ride for that, but yeah.
I mean, some people look at the 11.5-minute long songs and just instantly get intimidated by it. It's the with New York hardcore, they have the members themselves that intimidate people, but with prog metal, it's the song lengths that intimidate people. So
yeah, exactly. Yeah, all the.
But I wanted to ask because I was excited. Technically, this was my first time witnessing a new Letallis come out in that regard. But, it's just as good, but you're not the same person who you were 10 years ago, maybe over 10 years ago, because, 10 years ago is when it was just released. But so, and, we all grow. Did you almost kind of have to find your, like, almost kind of quote unquote grow down a little bit, or maybe like kind of dig some old tools out of the toolbox to kind of put yourself in the headspace 10 years ago to create this new Letallis now?
I don't necessarily think I had to like put myself in that or like dig up anything. I think it was more so just like it's like having those things inside of you and just saying like, okay, like how can I best bring those out, or how can I best express that? It's kind of like getting out of your own way in order to like allow these creative things to just kind of come up, because it's something that I feel like if ever I'm feeling down and out or something, it's like, that's when I'm really not in touch with that, or not able to express those things. And I would say, yeah, I mean, like, let's see what changed for me and any of that stuff. I think it's more like kind of what serves the song now, and a little bit more like attention to detail than I think I had previously. But yeah, I mean, just kind of finding that side of yourself that says like, it's hard, when it's just you writing everything. So like you're kind of in your own like echo, or not even echo chamber. You're just not getting the feedback from anybody. So it's a hard thing of like, okay, I've heard this riff like 1,000 times now, is it something that is actually good? You kind of go through all the stages of like, I really like this. It's stuck in my head, to, I think it's okay, to maybe this fucking sucks, to back to being like, you know what? I actually think this is all right. And I'm cool with putting this out there, so it's like navigating all of that. Yeah.
Navigating it within yourself is harder than navigating anything within the industry or through higher ups or anything like that. I think once you can navigate through yourself, you already completed 50% of the dream.
Totally, yeah, and I mean, I think that's something that will always kind of be a process. I definitely don't think it's something where I'm like, oh, now I have it figured out. But it's kind of more so about being a little more objective and honest with myself, and just kind of like that. I hate to say this, but like failing faster. Instead of like kind of getting hung up on something where I'm like just like stewing on it for a while. It's like, okay, like how do we actually feel about this? Let's just be honest and then keep going. Yeah.
Do you think artistic growth is something that you have control over? Can you dictate evolution and make it form on your own? Or do you kind of have to let it happen naturally? Because I feel like sometimes when you are letting things happen naturally, like you tend to... I'll ask this question with a very unpopular opinion flirted in there.
Okay, yeah.
The new Tool album was amazing. It was great. You cannot convince me that it took fucking 13 years to make that, because it has everything that we've heard in 10,000 Days or Lateralus. Like, it wasn't a distinct, complete turning the page of a Tool album. It was a Tool album.
Yeah.
There was no need for it to take 13 years to release. So, but they said it was evolution. It was a natural process and all this. I'm like, really though? Because I think you could have written that in 2007 just as much like as you released it in 2019. So circling back to you, can you really dictate your own growth? Can you really like let it always happen naturally, or do you kind of have to maybe like artificially push things a little bit more, if you know what I mean?
No, totally. I mean, hate to say this, sorry to upset some people. I'm actually not not the most well-versed Tool fan. So I can't even I can't even comment on your controversial opinion.
We just became best friends, but go on.
Yeah. But anyway, I mean, I feel that, it's hard. It's one of those things where it's kind of like, I'm kind of thinking of it in the same vein as like when somebody talks about like motivation, right? And it's kind of this thing of like, waiting to be motivated or waiting to have this like artistic thing, Sorry. Also, if you hear some heavy breathing, by the way, that's my dog in the background. But
I saw the dog moving.
I get excited
around.
too.
I love it. I love it when the pets fuck up the interview. That's my favorite. Security at concert venues, no, but pets, absolutely.
Yeah. She's definitely trying to get my attention. I mean, I would say it's always great when it feels like it happens naturally. That's just one of those things where it's like, oh man, I found this new artist or something that inspires you that you can then kind of, like feel like you could really pull from that. That's always like a great feeling. What sucks is when you feel like you hit a wall and you feel like whatever it is that gave you that inspiration before or that creative juice is just like not there. So it's always easy to say like, yeah, let inspiration happen naturally until it feels like it's not. But I am definitely a believer that you can definitely, take the wheel by, and then just kind of steer it in the direction that you want to, right? And it's like, okay, I'm hitting a wall, or it's like, let's say I'm playing guitar and I keep playing the same riffs. It's like, okay, well, I can make a conscious effort to try and learn some new songs by some people and just kind of intentionally break myself out of that own, like feedback loop. But the thing also with motivation too that I find is like, instead of waiting to be motivated by something, it's kind of like putting a middleman between you and this thing that you want to get to. So to me, it's great to feel that, but in a lot of ways, it's kind of like, what, like, fuck being motivated. I'm going to show up and I'm going to just work on this thing regardless, and it's kind of like you continue to chip away at something until it eventually gives, until something new happens, and I definitely think that's the way to go, because if you wait around for inspiration or things like that too long, that's something I've definitely learned over the last 10 years. I mean, lots happened since then, but yeah, it's really knowing that you have the ability to move the needle on your own. Yeah.
Oh, 100%. And I'm really glad to hear you say that, because I don't buy it unless you're Metallica or you're like a fucking, a stadium headlining band where you don't need to worry about your paychecks anymore. But when people say, "Oh, it was all natural. We only write when it feels natural," you're full of shit. You're full of shit. There's no way you're able to put the same album or not the same, but to put a new album out every 2 years and feeling the same type of inspiration when you're spending the in between that touring and really just having a similar routine. Like, you look at a lot of like the death metal bands that we like, or a lot of like, the metalcore or prog bands, it's a constant routine. Put out a record, tour for 2 to 3 years, put out another record, tour for 2 to 3 years, and so on and so forth. Like, you can't possibly tell me that it's all natural inspiration when you are doing the same sort of routine in a way. And I'm not like saying it like it's a bad thing. I honestly don't think it's always bad when maybe like a record label maybe lights a fire under an artist's ass or something like that. Sometimes you need that,
Oh no, absolutely. And what was the thing I was just going to say on that? I mean, yeah, it's like, I don't think any record, like, for it to take like 13 years to make or something, it's like, it's not going to like, you're not going to, as the listener, you're not going to feel like, oh man, this took 13 years, or like not took 13, but like, wow, this was worth a 13-year wait or something like that. So, yeah, it's just something that, you definitely have control over, and to like show up and do it. And something that I'm definitely a believer in now, more so than I was, years ago, is that it's like creativity is like a muscle. I used to have this outlook of like, it's kind of like a glass, and it's like, I only have this much creativity, and if I overuse too much of it, then guess what, I don't have anymore. And it's like, that's a terrible way to look at it, because it looks at it as this finite resource. And I definitely believe it more to be now like a muscle, where it's like, you can't just walk into the gym and lift 300 pounds. You have to work your way up to that, right? So it's like, to have those creative juices going, it's like you need to constantly be chipping away at it, and it becomes like a ritual and a process, so that way you can, it's like, instead of me not feeling creative for a year or however long, and then trying to get back into it, it's like, well, you're going to feel really rusty as if, compared to like if you were working at it and like you're constantly pulling from it,
Definitely. I have 2 more questions for you, if that's cool.
Sure.
But I remember the last time I spoke to you, which was, again, on a SoundCloud page that I don't even have access to anymore, because I don't think I've paid the bill in like 4 years. But
Nice.
We talked a lot about production as well, and that, and I know that you are really into you. It's not just the mic and the guitar that we see on stage, but you do know a lot of the nuts and bolts and the DNA that goes behind each song and the production world. Would you consider production, the mixing board, if you will, to be just as much of an instrument as the guitar?
That's definitely a good question. I don't know if I would necessarily equate it to just as much, but to me, it's like at least the other 40% of, if the music is, let's say, like 60%, and like what you're doing, I would say production is at least 40, if not 50%, of the other part of the equation. Because it's like, if you're putting out something creatively, right, it's like, how are you going to represent that? How are you going to get that across to somebody? It's like, just in terms of mixing, like, so I not only do I write all this stuff, I, record it, mix it, master it. So it's like, when you're coming up with some type of creative outlet, right, music in this example, how are you going to present it? So it's like, if you mix it, it's like, am I going to mix this like a jazz record, well, that's going to come off totally different than me trying to mix it like a modern metal record, and even within metal, there's multiple. Is it going to sound like an old school death metal record, or is it going to have like more of like a polished, clean, very modern type sound? So all of those avenues lead to how somebody perceives it at the end of the day, and that's like so important. You know, it's like absolutely critical. So, I definitely think it is a huge creative part of it. It's something that a lot of people aren't aware. Like they'll hear a record and they go, I don't know, I just didn't like it. And I go, yeah, I think the production wasn't that great. And sometimes, in the case of like, let's just say like black metal, right? It's like there's a lot of times where they're going for not great production. And that's if it was too polished and too clean, it wouldn't sound right, So it's all about like how are you delivering this medium?
Well, I wanted to ask you too. So comparing like tattoo artists, right? Now the average guy who gets the occasional flash tattoo on a Friday the 13th, they're not going to be as focused on the technical application. I mean, every tattoo artist focus on your technical application, but they're not going to be like, oh, undersaturated, shaky, minor blowout there. Like a lot of people don't notice a lot of those errors. Production in music, do you notice errors in your like songs like that maybe the average listener doesn't because you have that production background? I'd imagine you are probably more nitpicky about your work than any even honest reviewers that you would see on Metal Injection or Metal Sucks or whatever probably would not pick your songs apart as much as you.
I mean, there's definitely, there is that like forever critical part of myself that, is just like, oh man, this could be better or whatever. I'm pretty actually happy with the way the latest EP came out. I could definitely be pretty critical of like some of the stuff on Resonate when I listen back to it. Then again, there was a lot of stuff like that. Just home recording was not nearly what it is today, even though I did the whole thing in my bedroom back then too. But it's easy to let that kind of like run amok in your head. I think that's something also in terms of you said, like what's changed, like since I last released, like a full length, is definitely just coming to terms with like, okay, like this is as good as I could get this to sound. Like, sure, like if I gave it to somebody like a Will Putney or a David Tarot, like mixing wizards, like sure, it would rip that much harder. But in light of that, with what I have, like the tools that I have, and everything, and just the time and energy, it's like, this is actually something I'm happy with. So being able to kind of listen back to something and go like, I could still pick it apart further if I want to, but kind of going like, you know what, like it's done. And that's the other thing too, like getting a tattoo, right? Coming to terms with like, this is now on me, and and guess what, like I'm actually happy with it, so that's a nice feeling to be able to do that, because there's parts of me that like if I wanted to, I could nitpick it, but it's at that point it's like it's not serving me anything.
I can only dream to have the peace of mind that you have with the creative process.
I mean, trust me, it's not that I don't want to then continue and make it better and make it even cooler and whatever. But yeah, just kind of being like, you know what, like that was at the time, and I'm happy with that now. Yeah.
And the final question I wanted to ask you, and I've been meaning to ask this, you're probably the first person in the scene that I get to ask this. So this is very important question now. We lost St. Vitus. We lost Kingsland. We lost. We took it in the face this year in the scene. Like, and I've never been one to be like, oh, the scene is dying because this dive bar closed. I've never been like that, and I'm still not really. But Greenpoint is pretty much gone now as a location that we play at, because we don't have Bazaar, Kingsland, any of that anymore. We lost a couple of other places, and the fact that I can't even remember them off the top of my head is tantamount to where do you think our scene currently stands right now?
I mean, it really fucking sucks about Vitus, especially the way it went out. It was just like, it just felt like such a really cheap, vendetta against the venue and everything. And then, even places like Kingsland, like I played there a bunch with multiple different bands. And it's, that was always kind of like, I was actually really surprised about that one. But it's hard to say, I mean, I feel pretty good about it just because there's been, like after that kind of limbo period after the pandemic, when shows weren't really happening, and then all of a sudden, like, things started coming back. It feels like that wave hasn't really slowed down in terms of like metal shows, at least coming through the city. So obviously that's like bigger touring acts, right? But more so on the local scene. I don't know, man. I mean, it's like there's a lot of people in the scene that I definitely trust in that are putting a pretty good effort into like making shows happen. Luckily, there's still the Monarch and the Meadows. Meadows being a little bit more open to like local stuff, and now I think it's the Wood Shop. Is that next door to there? But yeah. And so there's definitely some spots. I mean, unfortunately, I've even heard of some of the other local spots kind of saying that maybe they're not doing so hot. But things like having like St. Vitus Presents, the fact that it's still continuing on despite that the venue itself is not physically there. So it's like the presence of it. It's like they're still booking the shows, still making it happen. I think there's enough people in the scene and enough of a desire. Like metalheads are always really cool about showing up. For the most part. Not always, but it's hard. It sucks. It's like it's very disheartening. But at the same time, I believe there's enough people there to make it. Still flourish if it wants to. Yeah,
100%. I mean, there's a lot of issues internally. I think that just goes beyond venues. That I think that maybe the scene needs. I mean, everything is a work in progress. So like, there's always things in the scene that could be done better that would make it flourish more. But like, I do agree that we got the Monarch, the Meadows, the Wood Shop, we got TVI, we got Transpicos, we got like
Our Wicked Lady.
Yeah, Our Wicked Lady is really like that whole area right now. Brooklyn is almost becoming like its own little Sunset Strip in that regard. And
it's not bad, man. I mean, it's cool, and also with Danbro Studios, like a few blocks away, it's a pretty cool kind of mecca for musicians in the area. Yeah.
Yep, and we can't forget Pumps around the corner either.
Essential.
Yeah. Well, I mean, there are rehearsal spaces right above it too. So, I mean, what were you thinking I was shouting them out for? But
no idea.
But before we go, I want
to. A great bar service.
Yeah, exactly. Just bring cash. Before we go, I want to thank you so much. It feels so good to finally make this happen, and it's been a long time.
Yeah, man, it's been a long time coming.
Yeah, it's just with the release of this new EP, what else could be expected from Letallis in the near future? What else could be coming out soon?
Yeah, I mean, we're just kind of, had a little bit of a setback just in terms of playing some live shows this year, but looking to hop back on that, and then really just kind of more the same in terms of, part 2 coming out at some point. Still got to write it, but working on that. Yeah, and then, hopefully maybe some music videos or something, and playing places near you soon, hopefully.
Hell yeah. Well, thank you so much, everybody. We are here with Letallis. Be sure to check out 1001 Nights, Chapter 1 EP. We will see you next time on Heavy New York.
Thanks for having me, dude.